Hello, thanks for watching this video. What I'd like to do is give you a quick overview of the lab that we had at Summit 2017, which was titled Managing OpenShift from Installation and Beyond. I'm recording this screencast for those who may have missed the lab. And what I'd like to do is just give a quick overview. We have very few slides, it just talks about the environment and kind of what our goals are and the different products that are involved with the lab. And I'd also like to give a shout out to all of the lab partners that worked very hard on this. Andrew Block, Scott Collier, Jason DeVarius, and myself, Vinny Valdez. We each brought specialties to this lab, and I think that we put together a really good cohesive overview of these different products and how they interact with each other. And we also did a lot of work in automating the standing up of the lab, and we absolutely would like to bring this back in future summit or other tech conferences where this might be useful. With that, I'm going to go ahead and move forward with talking about the different pieces of the lab. The idea here is that we're going to look at how to manage OpenShift from an operator's point of view, but we're also going to switch roles a little bit later and then use OpenShift as a developer would and kind of see what those different roles are and how to interact with them and understand where these different products come in. The four products that we're focusing on would be Red Hat OpenStack Platform. And the reason for this is going to provide the servers that OpenShift will then be installed on top of. We did have a standalone KVM virtual machine, which represented a Red Hat OpenStack Platform instance. It wasn't all-in-one. The purpose of it was just to stand up instances or servers for OpenShift to be installed on. And that work is actually done by Ansible Tower. So what you'll see in this lab is the work of all of the prerequisites for OpenShift to be installed are automated through Ansible playbooks and orchestrated through Tower. Then the actual OpenShift Ansible installer comes in and installs OpenShift on top of the servers. And then there's some post-installation work that's done to prepare the OpenShift environment for the rest of the labs. And part of that is where Red Hat CloudForms will come in. So there'll be a lab that goes through using OpenShift to install CloudForms as a containerized version and be able to manage both OpenShift as well as OpenStack underneath it. So this is a really good end-to-end story of both operators and developers coming in and using these different products together. So here's a quick diagram of the layout. So in the lab itself for Summit, we had a separate what's called instructor machine. And this is a single machine that provided repositories for all of the 50 students in the lab. But in this example, what I'm going to be demonstrating today, I'm actually running this repository on the same machine as I'm running these other KVM machines. The other two virtual machines are going to be an OpenStack VM that I mentioned, as well as Tower. Tower is going to be a KVM instance. Once we have connectivity to the different VMs, we're going to start with OpenStack. We're going to take a look at it. We're going to show that there are no running instances on it or servers. And we're going to log into Tower. We're going to then start the deployment, and then we'll explore the rest of the environment. And that's kind of how we structure the lab. The deployment does take anywhere from 15 to 25 minutes, and maybe even more, just depends on the performance of whatever the hypervisor system is. So we like to get the students started right away. We found out just kicking off the job right away without any explanation and then going into describing the environment was a really good workflow. And so we have our different labs. So we start with Lab 0, which is what I just mentioned. We start the job within Tower, and then we kick it off, and then we go into Lab 1, which does an overview similar to what I just did. And then we look at Lab 2, which is a little bit more in-depth exploring of the lab. We tell the students how to log into the different instances via the UI, or if it applies, for example, for OpenStack, how to SSH in and look at everything from a CLI perspective. And then we have them continually monitor the Tower job until it's completed. And that's Lab 3. We then come in and verify that OpenShift was installed properly. After we do that, then we move on to Lab 4, which is installing CloudForms. And then we switch roles from that of an operator to a developer role. And then we just deploy a sample application just to show them how to use OpenShift very briefly. And then lastly, we look at how to expand. So what we do is we go back to Tower, we kick off a scale-up job, which will then add another node by creating an instance on OpenStack and then joining that to the OpenShift cluster. And then we conclude with just sort of next steps and references and so forth. That really wraps up the discussion. I'm going to go ahead and move on. And what I'd like to do is just give you a quick peek at the guide. So this is what we printed out and made available in digital copy to the different students. We have all the labs I just talked about, kind of information, and this is a complete walkthrough. My point is that this is completely self-paced. We have all of the commands, which host you're supposed to be on. We have the commands that you can, double click inside the table cell here and just copy and paste easily. And for the most part, we try to make it as easy as just, copying and pasting. Let's go ahead and get started. This would represent what would be the student workstation. So if I do a virtual list, just to show you, we have these 3 VMs running. So we have the repository that I mentioned, we have Ansible Tower, and then we have OpenStack. Rather than going from the CLI, I'll go ahead and just pull up the UI. It's right here. But there is nothing on the system. So I've come in to this project, which we named our lab session number. I am logged in as user. I am not admin. You can see that here. Just to give you a quick overview, we have one image. So this is just a rel guest image that we took, and we put repos on it locally for the OpenShift RPMs, and we put some images preloaded. We did that to speed up the install. Now, something that Jason figured out, which is a great boon to us and gave us a lot of performance improvements. So this is essentially a volume-backed image that we could then quickly boot up instances without waiting for them to copy the image from the Glance store onto the Cinder volume. So that's the reason you see a volume there. So now let's go ahead and hit Tower. Log in as an admin here. We're going to go straight to templates, and you'll see that we have a number of different items here. So we have a couple of workflow templates. So 0, provision and install OpenShift, and then we have another workflow template, provision and scale. So we're going to start with this top one. Now this will call several playbooks. Okay, so I'm going to kick off this job. Now this will take, as I mentioned, 15 to probably more closer to 20 minutes. So I'm going to kick this off. I'm going to poke around a little bit and wait for it to start creating instances. But this is running here, and you'll see at the bottom we have essentially our 3 stages. We've got the pre-install running, and then once that's completed, it'll move on. So if I hit details, we could actually see the playbook running, and here we go. First, it's creating the flavors, key pairs, security groups, and so forth. And now it's going to start creating the volumes and then the servers after that. And here we go. So we have OS server. So if we flip back over and refresh OpenStack, and there we go. We can see that master.osp.example.com is being provisioned. And we did use static IPs for everything. So we created those ports ahead of time. This will always have the same IP. And we can see that it's created pretty quickly. If we go back to Tower, we should see this refresh here in a minute and move on to one of the nodes. Now we do have a very simple environment. So we have a single master, we have an infrastructure node, and then we have an application node. And then when we do the scale up, that will add another application node. And here we go. We can see that it's moved on to infra. So similarly, no, we can see it's done infra and actually node 1. And you can see that was pretty quick. So if we just do OpenStack server list, we should see the same thing that we're seeing in the Horizon UI. There we go. So we see the same IPs, we see the same names. So these are done. So if we take a look at volumes, which of course would be the same here, we'll see that we do have volumes for node 1, infra, and then we have some other volumes being created as well. Okay, so we're going to let this run now. The pre-install is done. So if we now go back, in fact, we can go to jobs. We can see what is running. The pre-install was completed, and now we're moving on to the install. So we could actually click on this and watch the playbook run just like we did with the pre-install. Here we go. And we can see the time that it took to run right here. So it took about 12 minutes, a little bit over. Not too bad. So if we go back to jobs, we can see our list of jobs that are trying to run. And now we're on the post install. So again, we'll just watch this playbook run, and it shouldn't take much longer until everything is completed. So it looks like everything is now completed. So let's go back to jobs, and we should see the actual workflow template that we kicked off earlier is done. And we can actually go back to this. We can see the 3 stages are complete, and we can see the total time took about 17 minutes. So just under 20, which is good. And let's go explore the rest of the environment, make sure that we're good. So we saw that we had all of the instances and volumes already created. So really, we shouldn't see anything different on OpenStack itself. What we should see is we now have OpenShift available. So let's try to hit that. And for the console, we'll hit 8443, get our certificate warning. And here we go. So we have OpenShift running. So next, let's get on the virtual machine itself. So in order to get in, we're going to have to use cloud-user. There we go. So now we're on the master server. So we can do something like OC get nodes, and we have the master, the infra node, and then the application node itself. I'm going to go ahead and expand this a little bit and go back to the document. And what I'm going to kind of walk through is very quickly, just kind of verifying as you go through and do what we've already done. Look at the job, make sure that it's completed. Have you go back to OpenStack, make sure everything looks good there and so forth. Have you run through some OC commands. We just did get nodes, get projects. We could do some of these commands just to make sure that everything is working. I'm going to leave this kind of for the exercise of the watcher to kind of go through these labs itself, but we're going to jump over to the lab 4. One of the things I'm going to do to speed this up is I'm going to run through all of these commands. I've got them captured already in a bash script, but I just wanted to kind of overview what we're doing here. So we're going to create a new project called CloudForms. We're going to look at the current context. We want to make sure that we're a privileged account. And then we're going to grab a CloudForms template, and this is where the repo server comes in that I mentioned. We're going to grab that YAML template, and then we're going to use that to instantiate the actual container with CloudForms in it. Okay, so then lastly, we OC get pods command with the watch flag and make sure that all the different pods come up properly. And we're just going to run this. Okay, so from the master, I'm just going to go ahead and... Okay, so these are essentially the entire lab condensed down into one bash script. This will take about 5 minutes. This is going to instantiate all the different pods required to support the CloudForms application itself. So I'll return back in a minute when that's complete. It's been right at 5 minutes, and we can see all of the deployment pods have been terminated, and we have the CloudForms pod running now. So let's once again take a look at our projects. We should see that we now have a CloudForms project. So let's go ahead and change our context into that. And that's where we are now. That's good. Just want to verify. So let's go ahead and take a look very quickly just to make sure that things are looking good, and then we'll connect to the UI. So let's do git PV. Let's take a look at the physical volumes. And we can see we have a 10 gig, a 1 gig, and a 1 gig. These are bound to different pods supporting this application. We can also look at OC status for the entire project. But more importantly, let's take a look at the routes. So OC get routes. We can see we have our URL name here. So let's copy this and let's go ahead and hit that URL. And here we go. So now we have a CloudForms application containerized running on OpenShift, which is running on OpenStack. So let's go ahead and log in as admin. And what we're going to do is very quickly just add 2 providers. One's going to be for OpenShift itself that's hosting CloudForms, and then we're going to add OpenStack, which is supporting the entire environment. So we'll start here with container providers under compute container providers. Okay, so we have nothing configured. We're going to add an existing container provider, which is going to be OpenShift. Okay, let's give it a name. So we'll just call this OCP. It's our OpenShift container platform. This is basically what we're following here. We're going to add this as the host name with port 443. And then we'll just change this. So next we need a token. So we'll have to generate that token. So again, we'll go back to the guide. We're going to do the get token command to get this value that we need. Okay. So we've got that value. So let's go back to the UI and let's add that and validate. There we go. Successful. So now we need to go over to Hawkular. And similarly, we're going to want to copy and paste or just type in this host name. So again, we'll validate. And there we go. We're successful. So now we're ready to add that provider. So now we have OCP. And we click on here. Since we just added it, we don't have any data yet. So let's go ahead and refresh our relationships and our items. If we just gave it a few minutes, it would do that automatically. But we're going to kick that off so we can pull in some data. And there we go. We pulled in the data from OpenShift. We can see the projects that are created, routes, all this different information, volumes and so forth. We can drill into these as needed. But this shows here that we are now connected to our OpenShift environment. So if we go back to compute, containers, we can go to the overview. So a lot of the same information. We know we have 3 nodes. We have our 10 pods and so on. So over time, we'll start to populate some of this data as we have more metrics to display. But now let's go ahead and add a cloud provider. So we're going to add OpenStack. And we'll be able to have full visibility into our environment. So very similar, we're going to add Okay, so this will be, we'll call it ROSP. It is OpenStack, and we're going to leave these defaults. I'm going to go ahead and turn on tenant mapping so we can see the different tenants and the host name. So we're going to use non-SSL. There we go, successful. Now if we go over to events, we do have Slom Motor running in this environment, so there's nothing here that we need to do here. So we'll just hit add. Okay, so same thing we did before. We can click on this provider. We'll go ahead and refresh our relationships. And there we go. We can see we've got our security groups. We see the 2 cloud tenants, as I mentioned. So one should be admin. The other should be the lab L104353 that we created. And there we go. And we can see we have these 3 instances running. And like I mentioned, you can drill in and get a lot of this information. In the next section, we work on switching roles to that of a developer. So I'm going to go through very quickly and deploy a very simple sample app just to prove that we have working functionality. So let's go ahead and move over. We'll log in as user 1. So what I'm going to do is create a new project. I'm just going to call this cake PHP example. And we've customized what's available here to just be that of the example app that we want our students to use. The only thing we have to do is come down here and change the Git URL. Copy and paste again. Make sure that we don't fat finger anything. So we're pointing to repo.osp.example.com, and we have our Git repo there for this example app. Okay, so we're done. We'll go ahead and hit create. And now we can move on to the overview and wait for the pods to spin up. There are going to be 2 different pods. There's the actual application itself, the cake PHP side of it, and then the MySQL pod itself. Now you'll see there's an error here. We mentioned this in the lab. We're going to address that in a minute. It's essentially a certificate that needs to be accepted before this will work. So we'll get there in a second. And if you're familiar with the UI, you could also view the log and watch as activity happens. Okay, so let's take a look at the overall pod status. Now let's look at our deployments. And we'll go back to our overview. And there we go. So we have both of the pods completed. Okay, so now let's try the URL of this app. And there we go. So our sample application worked, and we can access it now via the URL, which is available via Git routes and so forth. Okay, so if you recall earlier, we saw that error about the metrics. So let's take a look at that. So let's look at applications, pods, and then we're going to look at the cake pod itself. So we're going to select it, and let's click on metrics. So we're getting this metrics not available. And I mentioned earlier that was because we haven't accepted the certificate. So let's do that. And we can see that here. Okay, so this gives us a little bit of about information for the actual Hocular metrics. So if we go back here, we can refresh the page, or I'll just re-browse to it. And now we select metrics, and there we go. So this gives us metrics of the application running itself. Okay, so the very last lab that we'll be running is the expanding by adding another node. So we have some verification here to have you go through. For brevity, I'm going to go ahead and kick off the job because it does take a few minutes. But if we come back over to OpenStack itself, we can hit refresh just to remind us that we have the 3 instances. And just a quick refresh again. And here we're going to log out. We're going to log back into ROSP. So same output. We have master infra and node 1. So now let's return to tower. And let's go to our templates, provision, and scale OpenShift. So we'll go ahead and kick that off. And since I widened the browser here, we get to see the panels side by side instead of top and bottom, which is a little bit easier to monitor. But we're going to have the pre-scale up, which will go out and create the instances on OpenStack. And then we will run the OpenShift installer to add that node. There we go. Now we can hit detail and watch the playbook run. All right, we can see that's already done. So if I rerun my server list, now we see node 2. And if we look at our volume list, we should see another volume for that node as well. And there it is, node 2. All right, very good. So that's going to run. This is waiting for the instance to start up, covering all our bases. Make sure we see it in Horizon UI as well. And there we go. We see node 2. Okay. In fact, here we go. So we did an inventory sync, which we saw running now, just so that Tower is aware of that new node. Now we're going to start the playbook for the scale up itself. So while that's running, I'm going to come over here and let's go back to master, OC get nodes. We can see we still have our 3. So once this playbook finishes, we should have node 2 there, and that will finish up this screencast. So the scale up job just finished. It took a little bit over 5 minutes. First, let's check the master. We'll do a get nodes again. And there we go. We see node 2. And if we'd like to dive a little bit deeper, we can come over here to our CloudForms instance and take a look at our container provider. We should see that we now have 4 nodes. So that concludes this demonstration. I hope you found this useful. Thank you very much.